Okay, we have just one more thing to cover, and that is, in effect, the so what factor, the significance of these colonial wars. Well, there's a lot of significance involved with these colonial wars. To begin with, it gave the colonists a great reservoir of men with military experience. Second, working with the British Army generated resentment at the British arrogance and disdain for colonial troops. The way in which the British sort of hogged all the loot from Louisbourg and made the New England troops garrison Louisbourg for years and so forth, that was just part of it. Anytime that the colonial troops fought alongside the British troops, the British officers made it very clear that the provincials weren't nearly as good as the British soldiers, that they were ill disciplined, that they were ragamuffins, and that they were insubordinate and everything else. One of the issues that the British is that the British and the colonists sort of failed to communicate about was that the British had this idea of, hey, you're under orders, you do what we say, and you go where we tell you, and so on. That's the end of it. That's kind of a modern conception of what you do when you're in the military. The colonist conception was, no, we have a contract. We came to perform a particular assignment, working under a particular subordinate, and as long as we're performing that assignment under that particular leader, as long as this is the deal that we signed up for, then we're going to do it. But if it's a different deal, the contract is off. And they didn't have like a literal legal contract. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that they had a conception of military service as being in the nature of a social contract that could be observed or could be broken. And so, to borrow a phrase from Cool Hand Luke, a film that probably most of you never heard of, but never mind, getting old, reaching back at cultural reference points that goes back to 1967 in this case. What we have here is failure to communicate. The British and the colonists were just talking right past each other when it came to this business of military discipline, and who had the right to give orders, what sort of orders were appropriate, and this kind of thing. So you had that problem. These guys are fighting alongside each other, fighting and dying. They're shedding blood with each other. They're celebrating victories together. They are grieving defeats together, and at the same time, they're getting on each other's nerves in a big way. Okay. The colonial wars also gave colonial officers, sorry, it's misspelled there, but officers like Washington a chance to gauge the strengths and the limitations of the British Army. And Washington and others would ultimately conclude the British could be beaten, but that it would require an army of long-term soldiers, disciplined and trained to the same standard as the British. Others would conclude that militia could defeat the British. And the reason why they thought that the militia could defeat the British was that no way were the colonists going to create a professional army themselves, because they knew from looking at the British Army, and they knew from the history of England and Oliver Cromwell, who exercised a military dictatorship over England, the middle of the 17th century. They knew that a professional army was an instrument of tyranny. And so a lot of them, when George Washington said, well, hey, let's create a continental army, we're going to need to, to fight toe to toe with the British. And so the other people were like, they were highly suspicious of that. Highly suspicious of that idea, highly suspicious of George Washington. But they thought in terms of, we see the British, we know that they're not invincible. What will carry the day is not the same level of automaton-like discipline that the British have. It will be the civic virtue of active citizens defending their land, defending their people. So you end up then with a common belief that if push comes to shove, and believe me, they're not thinking immediately the push is going to come to shove. You know, they've won a war together. It's 1763. The Treaty of Paris is signed, and this time France has given up New France, and that Ohio River country, is open as far as the colonists know. And and it's a great moment. Furthermore, for years to come, even when things start getting dicey between the British government and the colonists, a great day every year that all the colonists celebrate? The King's birthday. King's birthday is always a very big deal. We know that the wheels are going to come off of this relationship between the British government and the colonists. But they don't know that yet. They don't know that yet. These lessons that I have said that they have learned about the British are lessons that are kind of in the back of their mind. And they're not going to move to the forefront until a downward spiral of crises with the British government leads to the American Revolution, the War for American Independence, and the creation of the United States. And we will deal with that next week.